Welcome everybody to Live Meetings Updates. This is Ask the Attorney. This is a very unique show that we have, and we're featuring Joshua Grimes. Welcome, Joshua. We're really glad to have you on the show.
Thank you.
And so it's not a panel discussion today, but this is all about you. As in the past, it's all about you guys getting your questions answered. I do have some questions that were sent to me in advance, and Josh and I have gone through some of those to be able to make sure we're appropriately responding. But I'm going to start the show off as I normally do, giving you guys a couple, like some background. Some of you guys have been on the show for a while, so you already know the background, but I'm just going to cover it anyway. Okay, first thing I want to let you guys know that this presentation is informational only, and it does not constitute any legal advice. The sample contract clauses are illustrative and educational purposes only. Anything we discuss here is for educational purposes only, and it's based on our knowledge. Those seeking legal assistance is directed to seek advice from a competent attorney of their choosing. You could also contact Joshua Grimes. His contact information is being dropped into the chat right now for you, so you guys will have his email, phone, and connections to him on social media, and he welcomes those connections. So please just take a look at that. And I'm going to give you again the purpose of our shows every single week, as in over the last, can you guys believe I've been doing these for over a year now? Our purpose is to elevate, to inspire, to share resources, to educate, and to get us back to business. It's really about having some positivity here, and as we move forward. For those of you who've been on the show for a while, you'll know to use the Q&A section as much as possible. You really want to use the Q&A. That's where I answer all the questions for. I'll click on Answer Live, and then you want to listen once I click on Answer Live to the fact that I'm answering live, because sometimes I don't ask the questions as your question. I weave them into our conversation. So please listen for those answers. Do not use the chat for questions. Use the chat to give us a thumbs up or say good job, or to talk to each other. But please do not use the chat for your questions. I'm not checking that. I would ask you to look at the chat, because throughout here, we're going to drop in links. So right now you have Joshua's contact information that went out to everybody. I'm going to drop in right now our next shows for May. I'm real excited to announce I have, instead of one show in May, I'm giving you guys 2 shows in May. It'll be one May 13th. Again, the normal times, we're at 8:30 Pacific and 11:30 Eastern time. And this particular one is going to be discussing some really hot topics around in-person meetings with vaccinations and with the testing. And IHP is going to be back on again. And I'm really loving all the innovation that they have been doing. They have some antigen testing that they're doing pre-event. And Lisa, one of our loyal participants, has is actually reaching out to them to use this for one of her meetings right now. So they actually will do pre-meeting testing. They send out kits to all your participants, and they'll, with the video, and it has the participants do testing ahead of time, and then it'll give us as the planners a thumbs up that they are cleared. And so it avoids us having to get involved with any HIPAA privacy laws. And so that's really great. You want to tune in for this show. It'll be great, give you guys some great information and options to provide to your teams on how to have meetings moving forward. The next thing is to register for is on May 20th. We have some unique team building options right now in the space of virtual, but also in person. And I have a winemaker that's going to be on from Napa. I'm super excited about him because he also is a cook, a gourmet cook. And so he's going to share how he does some team building there. We have some cocktails that are going to be being made, and just some really great ideas that we want to share with you guys around having team buildings and getting drunk. I'm just teasing, not getting drunk. Had to have some fun with you guys on that one. So don't forget to register. So without further ado, I'm going to kick off with Joshua and just welcome him to the show. And again, remind you guys, use the Q&A throughout this, because that's the only way you're going to get what you need out of this, is by asking the question. But this is such a unique time we've been in over the last year, and everything keeps changing. And now you have the testing that's out. I mean, there's a whole new set of circumstances that are happening. But let's talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, while we're opening up and getting back to business, there's been a lot of hotels that are having trouble with staffing and getting, the staffing back up to where they need to be. And there's been a lot of issues around that. And I've kind of been curious about what we can do, or what can we put in our contracts that would protect us from service levels.
Okay, so, well, first of all, good morning to everyone, and it's great to be here. And let me just say first how refreshing it is to be talking about in-person meetings and going back to in-person meetings. As some of you, and I've seen who's on this Zoom, and I know some of you, and you've been with me in the past talking about all sorts of COVID issues. At least now we're talking about in-person meetings. So we're starting off on a good foot, a good place this morning. So
Thank you.
Staffing is a tough one for two reasons. Well, first of all, the issue, just laying out the issue as I understand it, and there are some people who are participating this morning who are with hotels who have a much better sense of this than me. But from my perspective, the issue is that, of course, when COVID hit everyone suddenly and there was no business, hotels, and not just hotels, other vendors too, laid off a lot of people. They furloughed people, laid them off because they couldn't afford, even with the government assistance, to pay them indefinitely.
Yep.
And now that meetings are coming back, they have to hire people. And the challenge is that some of those people who used to work not just in sales, but also on banquet staff and other functions, left the meetings industry. They got other jobs.
Yeah.
And now the hotels find themselves having to hire, not just hire because they've got business, but because it's still uncertain. I mean, the business is trickling in at many properties. So I would imagine if I was a hotel management person, I wouldn't want to bring a lot of people on full time until things are back to normal even more. So what does this mean for if you're a planner trying to put together a meeting? It means that the hotel could be in a situation that some are predicting where they might be short staffed or have inexperienced people on site for your meeting. And this could be everything from banquet servers to bartenders to people to clean up, to housekeeping, but people to clean up the meeting areas. What some people do is they put, and some people did this pre-COVID, they put the number of employees at various functions in their meeting contracts. So you might say, well, I'm having a social event and it's really critical for my business that everyone go right and people not stand in line at the bar waiting for a drink. So remember when we all stood at the bar waiting for drinks? Anyway,
Good old days.
yeah. So the question is, so what those people did is said, we want one bartender for every 10 people, and they put that in their contract. Or we want one waiter for every 15 people, or every 2 tables, and they put that in the contracts and the hotels agreed. You can do that. If you're a planner out there and this is a concern of yours, and it's a legitimate concern for some people, put it in your contract. When I said at the beginning it's a little bit difficult is because I really doubt that any vendor, hotel or any other vendor, is going to tell you that they're short staffed.
Yeah.
So if they don't comply, you're not going to know until the meeting happens, in which case it's too late to do anything about it.
There is
So
one thing, Joshua, there's one thing with that is I have found that if I'm having conversations up front and asking the properties for I can't remember the exact verbiage I use, is something like a guarantee of service, or it's to give me a guarantee that they're going to be able to perform, even though I have a contract. If I'm concerned about that at all, I ask for that, and kind of that's brought up red flags for me. If they aren't willing to sign a guarantee for being able to perform, then that has caused me to go, okay, well, what are the issues? Why aren't you able to do that? Because we have a contract, you should be. Are you familiar with those?
Yes. Well, and let me put it in a context I dealt with just yesterday. I'm helping a client negotiate a contract. The hotel will go unnamed. But I have my clients put a quality of facility clause in the contract, which basically says that if we took a look at the hotel's website today, That is the level of service and appearance of the facility we want at the time of our meeting. The
Yep.
assumption being if the hotel has it on their website, that's what it's going to look like. The hotel crossed it out. And it raises questions to me as to why they would cross it out. I can't answer that today, but yes, it raises a red flag. Um, so what I was going to just say when you were talking and raising your issue about the guarantee is what I think the most you could do is say, if the hotel doesn't, if you want specific numbers of bartenders or what have you, and the hotel doesn't provide it, put in the contract some sort of monetary discount that you get for that or something like that at the event. If they don't do it, of course, the planner then has to count bartenders,
Yeah.
but that's what you all do,
Yeah.
amongst other things. So understand it's difficult to correct on site. What I would do if I were a planner, just one last thing, is if I have that in my contract, remind your hotel partners a week in advance that that's in there.
Yeah, that's a really great point.
So anyway, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I do. Another thing that's come up quite a bit throughout this is waivers, and I waver on waivers. I'm not sure what to think about them because I mean, we all know COVID's out there, and first of all, what it leaves a bad feeling for me when I'm entering something and they're saying, "Hey, sign away that you may die coming to this meeting." Like, what is that about? And then obviously, if there was an issue, would I have a leg to stand on legally? And I feel like I really wouldn't, as long as the venue and the planner who were planning it did all of their due diligence to follow the guidelines and there wasn't negligence involved in that. Am I wrong in that thinking?
Well, no, if you're the attendee, I mean, you're assuming that's where you're coming from. You're not wrong in that there's a duty of care involved in everything. And if they followed the duty of care, which in this case would probably be lacking any specific contract language, the local laws, the local, state, federal laws that govern, particularly with COVID, things like that. And
Yep.
if the hotel has on their website, like the Hiltons and the Marriotts do, what they're going to do in response to COVID, and they don't follow that, that's on their own website, there might be
Absolutely.
some liability.
Yeah.
But other than that, let me just say with waivers, and see, I come from there because we see waivers all the time. You go to the amusement park, you get waivers. Your kids want to play athletics, there's a waiver. Go horseback riding, there's a waiver. And pre-COVID, I even have clients that had groups that would take them. And for those of you who don't know, I'm in Philadelphia, so I'm an hour and a half from the shore in New Jersey. And I have a client who would take people as part of an incentive trip or a group exercise to the ocean during the summer at the shore, and they have to sign a waiver about going into the water, even though they weren't doing much more than going into the water for a group activity. So this is what, and I think most attendees understand that, but there are challenges to waivers. If I were a planner or even a vendor that's that's in charge of an activity that's potentially hazardous, or someone coming to my property, I would ask for a waiver because it's kind of becoming standard. Understand though that those waivers may not be upheld. Every state is different about whether they respect waivers. Some states respect them if they're done properly. Other states, a judge is more likely to say, forget it. It's not worth the paper it's written on. But, and I'll talk about it's still good to do it. So what should be in a waiver? First of all, it should be written pretty clearly. And as we say in plain English, but having said that, if some of your attendees don't understand English, put it in other languages that they will understand. But it should clearly spell out the risks and the other things. So for in the COVID context, you would say, I understand that COVID is prevalent out there. I can reduce my chances of getting COVID by getting vaccinated, by wearing a mask, by social distancing. These are all things that I understand that I should be doing to reduce the spread of my chances of getting it. And I'll also cooperate with contact tracing if I'm asked. Having said all that, you then put in the waiver, I release venue, meeting sponsor, and third-party planner from any liability that may arise for if I contract COVID at the meeting. And then you have them sign it. The last thing I'll say, and I sort of promised I wouldn't give speeches, so forgive me, but there's a lot involved here. The last thing is with a waiver, if you're going to do one, do it in advance of the meeting. If you give someone a waiver, so suppose I travel to San Diego, which, by the way, I'm looking forward to being able to travel to San Diego or pretty much anywhere else soon. But so I go to San Diego. I get on the airplane, I fly all the way across the country. Oh, and I've registered for the meeting. I show up at the registration desk to get my badge, and they say, "Oh, Mr. Grimes, please sign this waiver." Well, at that point, I'm kind of committed, aren't I? I don't
Yeah,
have any choice. Um,
got to give them
then,
time to think about it in advance so they have
yes,
a chance to
yes, give
review
it to
it.
me before I leave home and
Exactly.
have me sign it or use a radio button if you're doing it online saying I agree. So that's with waivers, better to have them, but understand they're not full safe.
Yeah, and I think nothing's going to protect you if you're being negligent as a planner and as a hotelier. If you're having these meetings, you really have to dot your I's and cross your T's around it. That being said, I feel like if you're doing your due diligence, you're following all the guidelines and something happens, I don't see how a lawsuit like that would stick personally. There'd be
Well,
huge precedent to be set for everything.
yes,
Colds, flus, I mean, you've got it.
yes. And this is the challenge because this is actually what people always say when we talk about waivers. How are they going to prove that they got sick at my meeting? Well, I'll tell you how they would do it. One way is that if 10 other people also got COVID who attended your meeting, that's a more indication that they might have gotten it from someone at the event, or if there's contact tracing or that sort of thing. But
Yeah.
understand also the other issue isn't just am I liable, it's how much is it going to cost you, or your insurance rates will go up if you have insurance for this. If I get sued, because I could always be sued, and then even if I'm let out, how much is it going to cost to be, I got to hire a lawyer and all that, and distraction and all that, and then to be let out of the suit, what's that going to cost me?
Make sure you have an attorney's fees in there for those of you listening.
Yeah.
That way those attorney fees are covered in a lawsuit like that. So the other
Yeah.
question that was coming up is if somebody refuses to sign a waiver at a meeting, and obviously we're saying to have them sign it in advance of the meeting, not sign them at the meeting. That's an issue. But if you have them sign it in advance and then you don't get it in advance, what can somebody do? Obviously I would say you can't attend the program if you're
Yes.
not willing to follow and sign by, I call it a code of conduct. Mine's not a waiver. I have everybody sign a code of conduct because I want them to know up front what to expect. And I think that the pre-event communication is paramount to success of this. So you just have them sign one of those documents and it's perfectly fine. Everybody's aware of what needs to happen. But what happens if they do refuse in your mind?
Refuse a waiver. Um, well, the best thing would be to say they can't attend the meeting. But if that doesn't happen, or they're on site and you don't really feel that it's appropriate to just throw them out, um, maybe you put them in a separate place at the meeting. Either if the meeting's being broadcast like today, you could have them, frankly, not in the meeting room, but let them participate virtually. Or if that's not a possibility, you could make this person sit separately from everyone else so that there's a separate, that person is unlikely to contract COVID because they're not going to be near other attendees. Of course, you can't prevent them from mingling and mixing at other things,
And you
but
can't make any guarantees they wouldn't get it anyway, because there's a number of ways that it
but
can spread and it would be very difficult to prove.
although I'm going to guess, and we may be talking about this later about people who refuse to be vaccinated, but I'm going to guess that the person who wouldn't sign a waiver probably has some other political position about COVID that will come up in another way as well.
Yes, let's not go into politics on this
Yes,
show. So
yes.
let's talk about a little bit, if there's groups, this is one of the things I brought up, if we all opened up and we all had the same criteria for opening up, opening up everybody and having in-person meetings would be a lot easier to have happen. The problem is people opening up with different rules and different regulations. And we were just talking about a hotel that doesn't require their individuals to wear masks in their meeting space. And I am an advocate right now for following all the guidelines, which mainly say you need to wear masks and spatial distance. And so I'm making sure that I'm adhering to that. But what happens if I'm contracting with a hotel that doesn't require it and a group next to me is not wearing it, but I want to make sure my group is as safe as I can make them. I'm following all the policies. That kind of it eliminates the fact that I'm even having my group wear masks. So how can I avoid that?
Well, this is something to put in the contract, or if the contract's already signed, to do it afterwards. And what, look, hotels are private businesses, and convention centers, some of them are publicly owned, but their space is essentially private. So you can require, even if, like, Florida doesn't require masks now, but you can require in a business, and Texas, I believe, is the same way. You can require, the business can require in a hotel that people wear masks. And that's, and for, just like people have to wear a shirt and shoes. So that's enforceable. Now, it is a challenge. And in fact, this is a very good point you brought up, because many facilities have other groups, unless you're taking the whole space, or even if they don't have other groups, they might have transient guests who are in there who may not be wearing masks. And if you're concerned for your attendees, you need to have a conversation with the hotel or with the convention center and say, how can we make sure my attendees will be protected? And that can be everything from making your function space area exclusive to you and keeping other groups out. Now, it's difficult if the lobby is somewhat public and people have to go through there, but many facilities will do it now. This could be an extra expense for security, and planners, I don't think it's reasonable for the hotel to absorb that extra expense. I think it's a expense of the meeting if they have to do it, but it's probably worth it if you can effectively kind of cordon off your attendees, understanding that the only real way to do it would be to take over the whole venue. And even then, you might have transient guests that you can't control. So it's something that, if you're doing site visits today, something to think about. If your group is already contracted, you got to go back to the hotel and have the conversation.
And you need to ask, when you guys are doing site selection out there, I would encourage all of you guys to ask the question about what the hotel's policies are, not just on their staff, because a lot of these hotels have requirements for their staff to wear masks and have temperature checks and wear gloves and use proper hygiene, but that does not extend to their guests. And so you really need to make sure you're doing your due diligence in advance and asking the hotels what their policies are. I think that's really super important. And then I don't know if we wrapped up the facility staffing question, which was really how to avoid that, which is putting contract language. I think that we're getting a question on that, putting contract language into your contract about the service levels that you're going to expect. And you can also ask the hotel for a guarantee of service just before your program. If you have a program booked now, let's say I have a program for June booked now, I'm getting guarantees of service from those properties to make sure that I don't have to worry about the service levels when I get there. And if I do have to worry about it, there's consequences for that hotel, financial consequences. So I'm pretty confident that mine's going to go off without a hitch. You all should be considering doing the same exact thing.
If I could just add, because someone put something in the chat that I saw, which is a very good point. Someone who I presumably works with hotels said that some planners want guarantees. They want more bartenders, more waiters, but they don't want to pay for them. Well, that's a good point. That is something to negotiate. If a property needs to get paid more for additional staff, I think that's fair. Just like many properties say that if we're doing an F&B event for under 50 people, we need to charge an extra $100 for the service for the bartenders. Something like that, because it's a small, you're not going to get enough F&B revenue to generate enough for the people you have to hire to staff that event. So I think it's fair to have that conversation.
I agree with you. And I do think the negotiations up front, you guys, are more key than ever.
Mhm.
And I negotiate all of those things in my contracts beforehand. I mean,
Mhm.
I just make sure that those things are all put in so that there isn't any random fees that could pop up along the
Mhm.
way, because I'm coming obviously from a third party meeting planning standpoint, and I have my budgets are set and I can't go over those budgets for my clients. So I can't have a bunch of random fees that would show up that are extra. So a hotel needs to determine upfront if my business makes financial sense for them to take or not based on the concessions that I put in. So again, you can't go wrong with over communicating about this.
Mhm.
And I have some people that are in anonymous, and I don't generally answer questions from anonymous attendees. So if you can make yourself unanonymous, I'm sorry to do that to you. I've mentioned it, you may be a new person on the show. Please make sure that you do not use the anonymous feature. Um, Mary Dews is saying that the standard was 75 to 100 people per bartender. What is the COVID standard? There
Well,
you go.
since you have to have social distancing,
Yeah.
and all that, there may be different. Now, some states, now the states change all the time with what they're allowing. Some states were not allowing people to go up to a bar, and may still not be allowing. So you would have to do drink service at the table, and it may probably requires more. So that would be the COVID standard, would be to check, and this changes. So maybe this is an
Yes,
ongoing
it
conversation.
is.
And frankly, hotel people that are participating today, I would say for you, if you signed a contract 3 years ago, clearly you had no idea. And if you, and maybe the way you present this, and I actually have a client or two on this who are going to probably kill me for saying this, but maybe if the hotel says, well, when we signed the contract, we figured we're going to have one bartender for every 15 people. But now, because we may have to do table service, we need more bartenders,
Yeah.
and group, you need to pay for it. I'm not saying group should pay for it, but it's a conversation
No.
you should have. It's a conversation because it's almost like a force
Yeah,
majeure. Nobody anticipated that this was going to come up. And force majeure works both ways,
it
frankly.
does. It absolutely does. And that's something to think about, because it is a way for you to get out if the hotel can't perform to that standard, and you can't come to a mutual beneficial decision on how to move forward, and you can't perform according to what the standards of that contract said you were supposed to perform. That is a force majeure, and you could
Yeah.
walk away from that piece of it.
Yeah. Although I hope no one would have to walk away because of staffing issues with bartenders. You can tell what's on my mind this
Yeah,
morning.
exactly.
But it's your wine presentation next month. Um,
Exactly.
but yes, it's a conversation you should have, and everyone needs to come to the table willing to make it work.
I have Dave Elsie. Dave Elsie, I'm always glad to see you on all the shows. He's asking, are meeting planners expecting hotels to provide COVID protocols for meetings, i.e. temperature check, sanitizer, and face mask? And I'm going to answer part of that, and then I'll turn it over to you, Joshua. Is I am expecting hotels to provide part of those items. Temperature checks, maybe not. I feel like I've gone back and forth. Early on in COVID, I'd say temperature checks were something that I thought were very important that we had. Now that I've been doing this for a little bit, I don't think they're as important. They're an extra level that I personally have my temperature gauge there, and I'll electronically temperature check people who are walking in the rooms. But I don't deem it as being necessary. I've also had those little strips that I've sent up to attendee rooms where they could check their own temperatures before they came down. But I do expect sanitizing and face masks to be used by all the hotel. I expect the hotel to provide sanitizers. I do not expect them to provide face masks for my attendees. I expect my attendees to come with those. And then I have some extra that I'm traveling with, just in case somebody doesn't have one, or something happens. It breaks, things happen. Josh, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, but first let me say, clearly you're a professional in this business because you've thought about all these various things. Um, Let me say this, what I would expect, and I would put this in the contract, is that the hotel will do two things. One is it will comply with all local, federal, state, and federal state laws, including regarding COVID protocols. And B, if the hotel has its own program that like Hilton, Marriott, Omni, all the big hotel companies do when they put them on their websites, the hotel ought to comply with that as well and agree in the contract that they will comply with that. So if it says that we clean everything, 3 times a day, and our employees wear masks properly, and our employees social distance, I would expect the hotel to agree to do all those sort of things, and put in the contract that they will. If you want anything that's above that, you need to negotiate specifically, as Michelle was saying, you need to negotiate specifically what it is you want them to do. And that even can be if the CDC, for instance, or if your state doesn't require masks, you need to put it in the contract. And if the hotel doesn't require it, put it in the contract. Now, in terms of other things that you might want, if your group has other like testing,
Yeah.
you need to talk to the hotel about it, probably pay extra. In fact, there are outside companies now that will come and do that for your event.
IHP, we're having
Right,
them on next month's show.
right. Another thing to discuss with the hotel, there are two various other things. And one is what happens if somebody tests positive? Now, and I find people don't think about this all the time. Now, you
What do you do?
might say, well, they have to be in their room. Well, who's going to give them food because you don't want them to be out amongst your guests? Who's going to make sure they stay in their room if that's what they need to do and not go mingle at the bar after hours? I think personally, to assume the hotel's going to do that is a lot.
And who's going to pay for the room? That's
Right.
come up a lot in the
Well, right,
process.
right. What if they have to stay because they can't fly home? Now, within 2 days when your meeting ends, they have to stay because they're quarantined. Now, what I would hope is that the guest will pay for their own room. But
Yeah.
if they don't, I think it's fair for the group to be, or the group in the hotel talk about it, but the group probably will end up being responsible. But for food being delivered up there, in other words, it's things you need to think about.
And it has
Um,
to be done in advance. I have to say that
yes,
because honestly, in my contracts I'm putting in now, if somebody does come down with COVID, what room rate can we get? It's not a full fledged room rate. So it's a reduced room rate. I don't know how long they're going to need to be in that space. And so
yes.
it's a commitment on both sides. And part of my plan is to not from a HIPAA or privacy standpoint, I don't really want to be involved in a lot of that. So hiring an external company, I have no affiliation, I want you to know right now, with IHP, in-house physicians. They're one of the companies that I have featured on the show several times. I just think they've done a really great job in this space and specifically for meetings and events. And they've been doing it for so many years that it's a great transition over into our area. They were already doing it occasionally on our in our meetings area, but they're doing it a lot more now.
Mhm.
And so you have the opportunity to have that passed off because for a marginal fee, I want to say it's between $2,000 to $3,000 for under 100 people that you have at your program. That they will do health surveys out to each one of them before they actually come to the program. So you get a thumbs up or down, depending on if they pass the health survey and they know they can travel that day. And you get an EMT on site so that if you have somebody that shows symptoms, you now turn them over to that EMT and then it's out of your hands. You get informed of critical information that needs to be done, but they'll take care of whether they need to go to the hospital, they need to get tested, what they're tested for, and they take care of where that person's going to be. In my contract, I still have language if that happens for hotels, for for the hotel room and food and beverage to be delivered by room service left on their door. The individual, there's pre-event communication that goes out where the individual would have to leave their food outside the door. There's no room service during the time frame, but if they need pillowcases or something new, they leave their old stuff outside and then new stuff's delivered and put at their doorstep. So that's how that's up, but it's all outlined in the contract.
Right. Let me just say this, because I think that for the groups like yours that want to do that, that's great. I'm not sure it's an absolute. And what's going through my mind when you say is, and realize that, I get paid to think of all the
Yeah.
angles. you're assuming when you hire a group like that, you are being responsible to your guests. You're addressing an anticipated need of your meeting attendees, which is what you probably should do. But you're also assuming an additional obligation beyond what the law would probably require you to do. And so now you're taking people to the hospital. Your contractor is, but it's you that are dealing with that. So there might be additional responsibility towards that guest. And again, as a moral obligation, yes, that sounds like it may be what you need to do, but legally, some groups would want to think about that.
Yeah, I think that in-house physicians there, it's run by an ER doctor.
Yeah.
So it's an actual physician. So they literally assume all that responsibility and liability when you hire for them. So it's almost a separation from you and that individual. And then they handle all the HIPAA stuff. So you never even get involved. All I get is a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And that's all I need to know. Are they cleared to be here or not? And I don't need to have any of their personal information. And every attendee is assigned a number. So it's not like it's all just encrypted, and it's just a really great way to go. And Lisa Gallo from Daimler Chrysler's on here. She's using them now for 2 meetings, and she's just wanting me to bring up that they're using home pre-event test kits as well, which I kind of mentioned that. They send a video, and they're going to be on, Lisa, they're going to be on next month's show to talk about those kits and just how they're doing all that. So thanks for bringing that up. Okay. I'd say if a state does not require masks, can you ask them to require masks during the program?
Yes.
So what I guess it's saying, if a state doesn't require a mask, can you ask a hotel to require everybody to wear them during the program?
Yes, absolutely. But you need to ask.
Exactly. That's the important. And I think having that in your hotel contract up front is going to serve you well, because you don't have leverage any longer after that hotel contract signed.
But let me say, because people probably have figured out by now that I can never just answer anything in one sentence. There's two issues. We just answered the first one. You can require it. But in my mind, not the missing link, but the one weak spot that's preventing us from returning to in-person meetings faster than we are is a distrust that prospective meeting attendees have that other attendees will follow the rules. For instance, I was just telling Michelle before we came on an experience I personally had in my office building yesterday, where my office building has every rule about masking, social distancing. And then I got on the elevator last night, and as soon as the doors closed, I realized the person standing in there with me wasn't wearing her mask, and she refused to put it on, even though it's a rule. What was I going to do about it? So to deal with a situation where your attendees are reluctant to show up because they're worried that the person next to them isn't going to social distance, is going to wear their mask below their nose or below their chin, they'll start eating and then forget to put it back up, or that they're not, whatever the thing is, someone needs to enforce the rules.
That's right.
So
that's the big issue. You need
yes,
to make sure that, and that's not the hotel's responsibility
not
to enforce
necessarily.
those rules. It's in the public areas it is, but in our areas with our people, it's our responsibility, in my opinion, for my attendees to make sure all of them are doing that. And if they're not comfortable doing that, they don't need to be at the meeting.
Right. And what it is, and this isn't necessarily legal, but you don't want a lawyer or a security guard enforcing these rules. You want someone who has tact and kindness and understanding and can sort of, well, there's an expression I'm not going to use here, but make people eat something and like it kind of thing. The point is they're persuasive, but it's important, and it's important for your attendees to know that they're going to do that, because just saying we're enforcing the rules and then they get there on site and there's signs up, but nobody's enforcing the rules, that person, unless COVID's totally wiped out by your next meeting, that person's probably not showing up.
Yep. I think that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, sure.
I have another question. I'm going to read it directly. Thanks, Beth, for this question. They're saying COVID-19 compliance officer training recommends that groups provide the masks to their participants, mainly because they may not bring them, or they may not have one that's the proper type of mask. So it's better that the group provides disposable masks. And they're asking for what's the best, protocol or guideline for switching them out, say 2 to 3 times a day. I haven't heard that personally myself, Beth. I mean, when we've been providing, it's just 1 mask a day. Of course, if it breaks, but
Right.
generally speaking, it's 1 mask a day. Do you know anything else, Joshua?
I don't. I mean, I think that 1 mask a day is generally what I've heard that people do. Because they say if you have a reusable mask, you should wash it after a day.
Yeah.
Uh, Again, this is a situation, maybe if you're a meeting of epidemiologist physicians, maybe no, I don't mean, but because they're particularly attuned to the risks, maybe you want to change it more often. But
Yeah.
but if I think that's something you need to decide for yourself, because certainly I know the CDC advisories on COVID backwards and forward. Um, I don't recall that they've issued guidance on that, and maybe they have, but I don't know that they have.
I haven't seen anything that's been issued on it. I mean, like I said, I only have mine switched out 1 time a day, unless it's broken or something.
Yeah.
I do want to add, Glenn, welcome to the show again. Glad to have you back. What's the current industry standard for housekeeping regarding bed linen, towel changes, for instance, and are housekeeping teams wearing masks and gloves? I'll say yes to the masks and gloves. And they're also, they're supposed to be social distancing and they're using proper hygiene. Are they using glass or plastic cups? I think it depends on the property. A lot of them have the plastic cups that are in there that you can just throw away afterwards, but there are some that are using glass still. I would ask those questions, Glenn, up front, because I feel like every hotel chain has different standards, and you'll find they're like stay clean or safe clean or their safe policy, as Josh was saying from the beginning, on all of their websites. But I would go a step further. If you're looking at a property, I'd make sure to ask those questions of the property you're going to contract with, so you know exactly what their policies are up front. Because not only is it changing from property to property and from chain to chain, it's changing from region to region, from area to area, and then it's changing just because our situation keeps changing. So ask those questions.
Yeah, and let me just say, there's no requirement that you get housekeeping in a room every day. If you believe, and maybe this is an option you give your attendees, if they don't want housekeeping, they can decline it. I think every hotel will do that. If they just want a change of towels, they can get a change of towels. But there's lots of options there. If your attendees aren't comfortable with having housekeeping in every day.
Yep, that's how I feel about it too. And then Beth was just wanted to clarify on her question. She said the key point was that the group should provide the masks, not rely on the individual. And that's why I always bring some extra. I actually communicate in pre-event communication up front to let everybody know that that's what is expected. I'm also not assuming, and I'm encouraging all my clients to make sure there's a hybrid piece to all of the meetings, because I have autoimmune disease. So I'm in that category where I may not feel comfortable traveling as readily, especially to those places that I know where the hotels don't have policies in place that they're heavily enforcing, making sure that there's spatial distance and there's mask wearing. But that being said, that should be my choice, that if I want to participate and I don't want to show up on site, then I could go digitally and not have to worry about it. And by the same token, the opposite, if I was in a situation where I just anti-masks, anti-spatial distancing, and I wanted to go to the program, I should have an option to attend it and attend it virtually. If I can't adhere to the policies and procedures, I have an option to attend it and not go in person. And I spell that all up front. So either side of those extremes has an option to stay home and participate.
So if I could just add something, because you've just hit on something that I get asked a lot these days, but it's a little touchy. So if someone doesn't want to get vaccinated or they don't want to wear a mask, and you already asked that part, can you bar them from the meeting? Can you require that they attend virtually?
I guess it depends on where you are, right? Because
No,
Florida just said the governor here in Florida just said that you cannot bar anybody if they refuse to
Well,
do the vaccination.
I believe that only applies to government buildings. I don't think he can say that with a private business,
Yeah,
although I could be wrong, but I'm not sure he can say that with a private business. So, but here's the question. The answer in general, because let's not just talk about Florida. This is an
yeah,
issue the states open up web.
yep.
If someone doesn't want to get vaccinated or wear a mask, you can prevent them from coming to the meeting. But there are issues that, of course, are going to come up. So what I would suggest with someone is you can either say to them, as you said, you can participate virtually, or another option that I've seen some people choose is they create a separate area
Yeah.
in your meeting room where if you don't want to get vaccinated, you're sitting in this area and you're with
Love
either
that.
other people who don't want to be vaccinated, who aren't vaccinated, but they're social distanced and wearing masks. But the point is, it's a separate area. Now, the two things you need to be careful about are the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, which if someone has a disability, you can't discriminate against someone. But, and this has been used by anti-vax people to say, you can't ask me about my disability. That is not true. You can ask someone about their disability. And generally, if you're going to do this, please consult someone with expertise and get it right for you. You can ask for documentation of that disability for some sort of proof.
Really?
Having said that, the ADA requires what we call reasonable accommodation, which the group decides, not the guest. So if you can accommodate that guest by putting them in a separate place in the meeting room, within the meeting room, and so they can participate fully, but just separate, that's probably okay. The other thing is some people may have a religious issue with the with vaccination. In particular, one of the vaccines that are out there, some people for religious reasons don't want to get, so it may be delaying them from being vaccinated. That is also a potential discriminatory class that's protected. So once again, you need to find a way those people can participate, uh, again, separate area, virtual, whatever it would be.
I love that idea of doing a separate room for it. That's really a great way to do it and have let them still be connected.
Mhm.
Okay, so contracts are done so much in advance of the event and the space is constantly changing. In a contracting world, would you ask for the hotel to follow the current CDC guidelines, or the state guidelines, or the most restrictive guidelines at the time of contracting?
Well, and this is language you need to be very careful about. Personally, I would say whatever is the most restrictive that applies to the property,
Yep.
the location of the meeting. Having said that, though, you need to be careful on your words. Some say we will comply, you must comply with federal, state, local regulations. Well, what's the issue there? The CDC doesn't issue regulations. The CDC
Right.
issues guidelines and advisories. So if you want the CDC to apply, you need to say guidelines and advisories, preferably of the CDC. Um, it's just very careful language that you need to include. And again, it could be you say whichever is the more restrictive. You know, usually what I found in practice is that we end up defaulting to the CDC, because that's something that applies nationwide. Although I would advise that planners find out what is required in the locality where your meeting is and sort of start from there in evaluating whether it's sufficient, understanding that in some areas, after I said I was going to stop talking about Florida all the time, let's go back to Florida. In Florida, some local governments, like some cities, have different rules than the county has,
Yeah.
than the state has. So you may, and Texas, now Texas has had some issues about this because I think Austin has different rules than a number of other places, and Dallas than another number of other places in the state. So it's not always easy to figure out, but they all have websites you can go peruse and see what their rules are. I do that, seems like every day.
Yeah, because I feel like they keep changing.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about the language around force majeure. What language do you recommend using in a force majeure clause to protect a third-party planner? Like any specific around the pandemic or recommendation of outlining a timeline for use in force majeure?
Well, so this is for third-party planners. So presumably this is in your contract with your clients, right?
With the
It's not
client,
an,
with the hotel. So when
oh,
we're
and with the
negotiating,
hotel.
yes.
Well, so with the hotel, it's easier because it's what same thing you would do with any group because you're representing the group in that situation. Um, I'm not going to give out particular specific contract language because that's legal advice, but I would look for words like most hotels now and understand that even if you think you know hotel contracts, you need to take a good look at them because what I'm finding post COVID is that they are getting tighter. The hotels lost a lot of money in the last year, and I'm understating that, and I realize that. I regret a little bit because there's not more sort of cooperative, because every planner I know lost a lot of money too, and
Yep.
every group that had to cancel meetings probably lost money.
Yep.
But what I'm seeing now is language that just talks about cancellation if it's impossible or illegal to have the event. Whereas better, more customary language in the meeting industry is impossible, illegal, or commercially impracticable
Yep.
to have the event, or inadvisable to have the event. This is whatever you can negotiate, whatever you're comfortable with. The other thing that I've said that lesson we've learned with COVID is, and you just mentioned this about when you can invoke the force majeure clause. This has been a big ambiguity, and with COVID, that's come up. A strict force majeure clause, which is the way most hotels, and I'm not saying they're wrong, they've interpreted this is that you can only cancel when it becomes crystal clear that the current restrictions, let's say there's current restrictions that wouldn't let you have the meeting, when it becomes crystal clear they're still going to be in place at the time of your meeting. So if the governor of your state issues an executive order and says you can't have more than 50 people at a meeting, unless they put an end date on that executive order that is after your meeting is over, the hotel's going to say, and there's some validity to this, we don't know if it's still going to be in effect. So it's not a good force majeure reason,
Yeah.
even though
That's
at
the
this point
problem.
getting and
Yeah.
so and what group would say is, well, look, now we've got this new COVID variant. It's unlikely that things are going to open up. People still won't be fully vaccinated by the time, if that's true. So you get into this argument.
But there's also this other piece of it because we're not planning today for today.
Yes.
Or we don't start planning in June for June. So like if I'm
Right.
having a meeting now, I need to book tickets and start planning it
Yes.
now for 6 months in advance. And right
Right.
now I can't do it. So that's kind of where you
Yes.
get into the
So
situation. The hotels are saying, I don't know if anybody else that you are experiencing this, but I've had the hotels say, sorry, you can't invoke the force majeure because we want to wait till 30 days out. 30, I
right.
was like, 30 days? I need a plan. These
So
are 1,000 people I need to bring out. I need more time for that.
so here's where you need to make a decision. And sometimes you can negotiate, but more frequently, quite frankly, planners, you need to be insistent and sometimes go out on a limb with this because the contract is vague about it. And but you're right, what you just said. Do we plan a meeting the week before? No.
Yeah.
And do your attendees likely book their tickets to fly a week before? No, they probably book it a few months before and register for the meeting. And so let's say today you might have a meeting in, let's pick any other state, California,
Yeah.
although California hasn't, is just now going to start to open up. But suppose you have a meeting in July in California. If I were a planner today looking at this, and understand hoteliers, I'm respecting you might have a different view. But if I were a planner, I would be saying, everyone can see today California shut down. They're having resurgence of COVID. Nobody is going to try get on is going to reserve for my event today because conditions. The CDC is still saying don't get, even if you're vaccinated, avoid indoor group gatherings and avoid non-essential travel
Yep.
for the time being. So so no one's going to show up. I suggest you put a clause, forget about COVID for the time being. I wish we could all forget about
Yeah.
COVID. This has caused us to do this. If I were doing a force majeure clause today, for any reason, I would say that either 90 days out, if that's the date time or whatever you negotiate, group can make a determination, either party can make a determination that if it can't, if performance is illegal, impossible, or commercially impracticable, you can cancel at that time, because after that time it's throwing bad money after good because nobody's going to show up anyway. This is something you need to negotiate.
And I'm going to tell you guys, if you didn't hear this, I would make sure that you go back and re-listen to this thing as much as you can, because that's the single best piece of advice you've gotten on this show today.
It only took us an hour.
It'll save you.
So let me just say one other thing to be careful for.
Okay.
Traditionally, in a force majeure situation, both parties walk away without liability. What I have seen creep into some contracts recently is, if the group cancels for force majeure, the hotel gets paid for its not for its expenses incurred before the termination. Now, I would be careful about that. Again, if you want to agree to that, that's fine, but I would consider the implications that group might have a force majeure but still have to pay.
That'd be nuts. You guys should
This is
really,
just
really
something
read
I'm
your
seeing.
contracts. Yeah, read your contracts carefully. I mean, you just never know what you're going to end up getting. So read them carefully. What language should we use to ensure a property is taking appropriate COVID protocols as far as sanitation? Is there specific language that you put in there? I know we kind of touched on this earlier, but specific language that you would say?
Well, I would say that whatever you agree on, even if it's, I'll make it simple. So I'm having a meeting at a Hilton, and Hilton has, and forgive me if there's any Hilton people, I think it's called Clean Care is the Hilton
Yeah.
or things that it does. I would say in my contract, Hilton agrees to comply with the Hilton Clean Stay, Hilton Clean Stay protocols. And then I would ask the hotel to indemnify the meeting host and the planner if anyone gets COVID, is injured or damaged, or if they're injured, and it's proven that it's because the hotel failed to comply with the Hilton Clean Stay protocols. So that the hotel is basically only agreeing to do what the hotel company says they're going to do, and they're only responsible if someone proves that the hotel, if someone gets sick, and they can prove that the hotel did not do what they were supposed to do. And by the way, the only other thing that they're not only, but another thing some planners do, which is a good idea, on your site visits and right before the meeting, take a walk around and see if the hotel's actually doing what they're going to do. And if you don't, forget about looking at the contract. Just call up the DOS or someone else and say, hey, look, this doesn't, I haven't seen a housekeeper come by and clean this. Could you really just, make sure you're going to do it during my event?
Good advice. Okay, can you argue that COVID-19 is a foreseen event if it's no longer covered under, or can you argue that COVID-19 is a foreseen event, so it is no longer covered under force majeure? And if so, how do you ensure that you have a force majeure that's actually going to prevent or protect you?
Yes. I almost feel like a relative of mine asked that question, because that's a great question, and it's something that I've been discussing with people doing their contracts now. We know about COVID today, obviously, and force majeure. I don't know Latin, but I believe force majeure is Latin for something like unforeseen event or preventable event. The point being is that force majeure is intended to cover something we don't know about at the time of contracting. To put it in another situation, force majeure clauses got stricter 20 years ago, if you believe it's 20 years now, after 9/11, when they lost a lot of business, hotels lost a lot of business, not only because of 9/11, but after 9/11, some groups signed contracts and then tried to use 9/11 as a reason for canceling, meaning in New York in particular.
Yeah.
So force majeure is supposed to be something we don't know about. Now we do know about COVID today, obviously. So what you need to do is, if you want COVID to be covered, put in your force majeure clause after you say disease, epidemic, pandemic. You can put including COVID-19 and any variant thereof. Meaning, so if next year we have COVID 2021 and it came up from COVID-19, then you're still covered. I would also put a separate sentence at the end of my force majeure clause, if this is what you agree with your hotels and suppliers. The parties agree that COVID-19, that a resurgence of COVID-19 may be a force majeure event under this provision, just so you're perfectly clear about it. Because yes, otherwise, if I were representing a hotel, I would say on a contract I signed today, you can't cancel for force majeure otherwise, because we knew about it.
Yeah.
And by the way, insurance companies take the same position.
Yeah, absolutely. So it helps to have that extra language in. It also does help, though, to realize that even though it exists, you're still have a performance piece of it, right? So you may exist, and in California, while we know it exists, you still can't perform. And if you can't perform,
Well, that's a government regulation, which would
yeah,
probably be under a different thing.
but if you
Yeah,
can't perform, you wouldn't be able to have the meeting anyway from either
well,
side.
that's right. No,
So
that's correct. And look, this is a people think of force majeure in this industry as being a one-way street, meaning the group wants to cancel. But obviously, and unfortunately, we've learned in the last year that there are situations where the hotel needs to invoke the force majeure clause. So for instance,
I've had
I'm
it
sorry, you're
happen to
going to say
me.
something. Yes.
I literally had it happen to me at a hotel in Seattle. I was like calling the GM just to talk to him about, hey, my meeting's coming up. I want to make sure you're all set and talk about the guarantee. And the guy's like, we're not having the meeting. I was like, what? He's like, we're regulation. I was like, well, we could have it. We can still put like fit up to 50 people at this point in each of the spaces, and we could spread them out, still spatial distance. And they did not want anything to do with it. So they canceled on me.
Yes, yeah, and this is an interesting. This happened in the early days of COVID, because what I found is that many groups wanted to cancel, and the hotels would say no because we expect COVID to go away next week.
Yeah.
And well, I'm just saying this is the kind of thing, or we don't know.
Yeah.
Then the hotel would have to cancel because they were prohibited by the government from having the meeting. And the sarcastic lawyer in me would say, well, if it wasn't a force majeure for the group, why is it a force majeure for the hotel? But that is, to be honest, that is not an argument that most groups wanted. They just agreed we're going to go away. But the point is, the hotel sometimes needs to invoke force majeure as well.
Yeah, I do think that it's just, this is such a great conversation with you today, Josh. I really appreciate it. I'm going to ask that everybody on, don't forget to register for the May programs if you haven't done that already. I'm going to ask you guys to please put your last question. I have one more question that's in there right now. So if we have not answered, we're going to get ready to wrap up in just a couple minutes. So please ask those questions. I'll also remind all of you that on here, many of you guys have been following this week in, week out when I've been having these programs. Don't forget to fill out the survey for me. I do read every single person's comment in those surveys. And so it's really important that I get your feedback on how we did, but also future conversations that you want to hear us have on these programs. I also want to ask you guys to please remember to share these shows. I know I ask it every week, but I don't get very many people that are actually going on and finding the post and actually sharing the post out when I'm sharing those. So if you guys can do that for me, that's the biggest compliment you can give us. I'm still offering these programs free of charge for everybody. My guests that come on are also offering their services to share this information with you guys free of charge. So if you guys can help us by promoting it a little bit, we would really greatly appreciate that. So Josh, I'm going to ask you the question of
course.
Oh, and while he's answering this, let me share my screen real quick again, because I want you guys to have his contact information. Please feel free to reach out to him. Can you guys all see that? Can you see my screen, Josh?
Yeah, I can see it, sure.
And it has, okay.
And,
So,
and
go ahead.
if I might just say, and I hope you'll excuse me for saying this, but it's since they're nonprofit associations, aside from Michelle's programs, this one and the other ones, I'm scheduled to do a similar program or a different format, but for MPI Northern California for their ACE conference later this month, and for MPI New Jersey in May. So I hope you don't mind me mentioning that because they're both virtual. Unfortunately, they're still virtual. If anyone can go to their websites and see information on that.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Josh.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I have a question. This is going to be a doozy of one. Okay. So it's somebody who has a contract for September of 2021, and their space they're contracted, in the space they have contracted, they're not able to spatial distance. Their general session is just not able to be spatial distance. The hotel is asking for them to pay a $7,000 additional room rental in order to get more space, in order to social distance so they can have the space. And they're asking, should they be required to pay it? So I want to say from a meeting planner standpoint, and then we'll have the attorney speak to this. From my standpoint, I'd say no. I'm not paying anything extra to have this. It's the rule now that we have to be able to spatial distance if it is in that city. And that your property, if I'm able to have this program, is going to need to provide me with spatial distance space. That's just it. So all the properties I've worked with, and I have hundreds of them that I've had contracted right now into the future, every single one of them is honoring that space commitment to me. And given the parameters that those conditions still exist at the point we have the meeting, I know right now that they have space that's going to be able to take care of. Again, I asked for that guarantee, and you guys should be doing the same thing on yours. Josh.
Right. Well, I would agree in general with what you just said. I mean, you've contracted for a certain number of people, and and the hotel has to supply, actually the hotel should supply it in the same way that normal. Now if the law doesn't allow them to, that's a good excuse, but they shouldn't charge the group. This is again in general because the government is requiring you to do certain things. It's not the group's fault either. Now what a hotel could do is say it's a force majeure. We didn't know it was going to happen, and we cannot perform. If you can prove that, whatever the language is in your clause, you like forget about saying performance is impossible, because it's not impossible because of that, or illegal. But if you have commercially impracticable, if you can prove that it's really hard to perform without charging extra, maybe you would get somewhere. The challenge for the hotel is that it's hard to say that COVID is not a force majeure reason for the group, but it is for the hotel when they don't want to provide additional meeting space for extra, without making the group pay extra. But having said that, in general, I would hope that hotels would absorb that extra cost, because it's certainly the group isn't the reason you have to do it. It's the government, but again, you should talk about it with the planner, see what you can work out.
Yeah, and I like I said, this has come up for me. I haven't had the issue, but we really need to make sure that we're asking questions.
Mhm.
And in wrapping this up, I was going to ask Josh if you have one piece of advice to give everybody in the audience, just to leave them with, and I'm going to give you a second to think about that. While I just remind everybody that you really need to make sure you're having conversations. This is all about contracting, and it's all about having conversations. It's a collaboration. And so if you're having something that's booked, you're having the conversations up front, you're finding, like that instance that was just brought up where the hotel's not willing to give this extra space and they're wanting to charge you. That could be, the hotel could look at it from the standpoint that they're not able to perform and then do a force majeure, which either of you would be out on it. You could say the hotel's not able to perform and exercise a force majeure in that case, because you can't have the meeting because you needed to have 500 people there, and now you can't have but 100 in the space that you have. And so, as Josh said, it's the commercially impracticable to have that program at that point.
Mhm.
So you really need to really have those conversations up front and figure out if this is going to be a collaboration and you really want to have the program, how you can make that work together, or you just walk from it. But make sure that you are putting everything in writing when you're doing that, and that you're I don't know, you're just really making sure you're communicating everything very clearly. And that's my best advice for you guys today, and really in everything you do moving forward. So again, don't forget about the May programs. I want to thank all of you guys for being on the show and spending it with us today. Happy Global Meetings Day. I know that there's a lot of people that went to some other programs today. So we just really appreciate you spending our time with us. So last but not least, I want to have Josh share his one best piece of advice to leave us with today.
I actually had two, but the
Yeah,
first one I'll
two.
do in
Give
one
two.
sentence. The first one is read your contracts. Read them before you sign them. Read them after you sign them, so you know what you've gotten into. I can't tell you how many times people don't read things when they call before they call me. The other thing is that planners and suppliers have to work together to make a meeting successful. And look, people can hire me, can hire another lawyer. You can just have an approach yourself that you're going to get the contract you want, and you have a scorched earth policy that you have to win every argument with if you're a planner, you have to win every argument with the hotel. Or if you're a hotel person, it's our contract or the highway. Take it or leave it. The challenge is that you then have to work together to partner together to make the meeting successful. So in your contract negotiations and your discussions and everything else, remember that this is a partnership, and not one side or the other should win every victory, because that doesn't usually result. It makes money for me, but doesn't usually result in a great meeting.
I agree.
That's it.
Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, everybody, for coming to our live meetings updates today. We hope that you learned some valuable information. And if you would like to register for our future shows, go ahead and find Meeting Sites Pro or Michelle Hardy on Facebook and/or LinkedIn, where we go live for each show. And you can also watch our on-demand videos at meetingsitespro.com. Thank you and have a great day.